2020, a year unlike any other. A global pandemic, an economic recession, social unrest. It has tested our resolve, but it also has opened our eyes to how swiftly business can adapt, how dramatically the environment can heal, how resilient and connected we all are. Returning to the way of life that existed before COVID-19 would mark failure. This is our chance to repair and reshape the world in a way that works better for everyone. For 175 years, Deloitte has helped people, clients, and communities adapt to and embrace what's next. That journey continues with new challenges, but the same purpose: to make an impact that matters.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome wherever you are in India or indeed in the world to the first ever and hopefully the last ever virtual ceremony of the Economic Times Awards for Corporate Excellence. Because next year you will see me in person. I will shake hands with every member of the audience. No one will be allowed to wash their hands after the experience. Anyone wearing a mask will have to buy dinner for the 6 closest socially undistanced persons around them. There will be no vaccine jealousy. All of us will have been jabbed. And once again, Corona will mean something nice in a bottle, not something nasty we all have to battle. But look at the bright side, ladies and gentlemen. This year, you can have a drink while watching the show, wearing your favorite pajamas, and you don't even have to fake laugh at my jokes or clap. I won't know if you're not laughing, which is a very good thing for my ego and me. But unlike you, I can't wear pajamas and sip a cocktail. I mean, ET is a pretty cool paper, but not that cool. But as your MC, let me tell you one thing. Just because it's virtual, it doesn't mean the ET Awards ceremony is any less power-packed or interesting. We have a stellar cast of speakers and a fantastic list of award winners. Hope your devices are nearby. Please tweet away #ET Awards as the show unfolds. And a big thank you to our partners, Deloitte. I would like to now invite Mr. Vineet Jain, Managing Director, the Times Group, to give his welcome address. Thank you, sir.
Honorable Finance Minister, winners of the ET Awards, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm happy to welcome you to this edition of the Economic Times Awards for Corporate Excellence. As with most big events around the world, this too is virtual. But that does not take away from its significance, nor does it in any way detract from the achievements of our winners. Quite to the contrary, it has been said, not without reason, that the tough get going when the going gets tough. It takes a crisis to separate the wheat from the chaff, the extraordinary from the ordinary. This is a crisis unlike any we have faced in contemporary history. Even the most imaginative science fiction writer would find it difficult to conjure up a world as dystopian as the one we have lived through for a year. Just about everything has changed: the way we work, live, and interact. If there is one certainty that has emerged out of the pandemic, it is that there are no certainties anymore. The past is history. It can no longer serve as a guide to the future. That is what makes this evening extra special. Every disruption, every upheaval in human existence has led to new ways of thinking, surviving, and winning. More than ever before in the history of these iconic awards, we are gathered here to honor and celebrate individuals and organizations for triumphing against all odds. They have displayed leadership vision and an ability to rise above the ordinary in setting new benchmarks in excellence. Madam Finance Minister, I believe our awardees, all our guests, and the nation as a whole will gain greatly from your budget last month. It's bold, it's reformative, and it places a premium on performance. Instead of tinkering on the margins, you have focused on a few big ticket ideas, such as infrastructure spending and most significantly, privatization. In doing so, you have recognized two important truths. One, that the taxpayers' money cannot continue to subsidize inefficiency. And second, investment in infrastructure has a big multiplier effect. Yes, privatization helps governments raise money, but it is much more than that. The Honorable Prime Minister said it best when he said the government has no business to be in business. He emphasized it's the government's responsibility to give full support to enterprises and businesses. I believe this should be every government's dharma. The economic survey has projected a growth of 11% in fiscal 21-22, one of the fastest recoveries of any large economy in the world. It is achievable, but not by half measures. Madam Finance Minister, there will be political opposition to your reforms agenda, but you must stay the course. The next few months will be crucial. Infections are surging again, just as you are witnessing hopeful signs of revival across a number of sectors. The government needs to do everything in its power to keep the economy growing, even as it addresses the emerging second wave of COVID. There is no easy solution to the lives versus livelihoods dilemma. But my humble submission is that we avoid large-scale lockdowns. It will hit small and medium businesses and the millions of people they employ the hardest. What we need is strict enforcement of COVID protocols, targeted containment, and vaccination on a war footing. If we can maintain the pace of vaccination at 3 million doses a day, a milestone we achieved earlier this week, it'll help save both lives and livelihoods. Nirmala ji, we know you are not the health minister, but we look to you for our economic health and well-being. Also, there are some businesses that are inherently more vulnerable than others in a crisis such as this: hospitality, real estate, and media. And they may need an economic stimulus to stay viable. The ET Awards aren't just about top lines and bottom lines. Businesses do not operate in a moral vacuum, driven solely by profit motive. It is in line with this belief of ours that we instituted the Corporate Citizen Award long ago and the ET Evoke Social Entrepreneur Award this year. I'd like to thank every one of you once again for joining us on this very special occasion. I look forward to welcome you in person at next year's ET Awards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jain. You know, of late, I have been trying to become more Atmanirbhar. So I try to press my suit, cook my lunch, even fix my car. The results, well, let's not get into the results. The point is, I tried. And I'm sure India Inc. will do much better in India's quest for economic self reliance. And on that happy note, let me welcome our next speaker, who's not just the star of this event, but also the lady who shepherds what will most likely be the world's fastest growing major economy in the next financial year. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Nirmala Sitharaman, India's much admired finance minister. The Honorable Minister will give her keynote speech and then she will be in conversation with Bodhisattva Ganguly, Executive Editor, The Economic Times. She will also take questions from some of India's best known CEOs.
So thank you, Cyrus, and Nirmalaji, welcome to this virtual version of the ET Awards. May I request you to deliver your opening remarks?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Economic Times. I would have loved to be physically participating in an event of this nature where I've benefited coming over, interacting with everyone there. But this year, unfortunately, we are doing it in the virtual mode. But I'm sure, as Vinitji observed, the next year at least we'll have an opportunity to meet up in person. You are gathered to recognize the achievements of those even during these challenging times. And you're talking of a post-COVID world returning to a high growth path. Many things have been said, many observations have been noticed, revising of rates have been spoken about. The World Economic Outlook, as was spoken by the International Monetary Fund even in January, is revising its estimates, revising upwards gladly. So you see today even the global growth path is having a positive impact, but in that India's growth path is being pitched a notch higher. And I'm glad for it because the first quarter of 2020, we all knew what was the impact of the lockdown, which was necessary because we placed premium on the lives and a bit later on livelihoods also. So it is important now, therefore, to recognize those factors which are definitely indicative of the positivity that we have felt, smelt, and also spoken about. They are not just from nowhere. The indicators, whether it is the PMI manufacturing, PMI services, e-way bills, rail freight, GST collections, all of them, power consumption, all of them are indicating that this positivity and this absolute sense of no, it is happening, we are reviving, is not based on nothing. They are based on concrete evidence. And therefore, I think all of us should draw comfort in the fact that we are seeing all those high frequency indicators steadily, without a break, maybe a notch down, but yet being above in some cases, but in others, absolutely steadily going up. So we need to recognize the fact that India's growth is definitely on the higher growth benchmark and also that it is sustained. It is sustained since when it started in July and after that a bit slowly but surely. But now the frequency is definitely far higher than what anyone else would have thought. And as a result, you have review of what they think is the revival rate of Indian economy. The recent monthly bulletin of the RBI also spoke about services sector recovery. It also mentioned very clearly that there is a clear revival in the services sector also. And why should we be so much worried about services sector when manufacturing is definitely picking up and well at that? Because the Indian economy's GDP, services contributes 50% or more. And unless the revival of the services sector is sharply felt, most of us felt probably the imbalance would, make some kind of a disruption. So now with the RBI's latest monthly review, which has come out, the bulletin which has come out, we are assured that even services sector and its revival is distinctly felt. And I was so pleased and touched by the wordings which the RBI bulletin had, and I want to share that with you. I quote here: "There is a restless urgency in the air. There is a restless urgency in the air in India to resume high growth." This is the wording which RBI's latest monthly bulletin uses in the context of the growth which is happening in India, and who played what role in having that restless urgency come about is a different debate. But I was so glad to read these candid lines from the RBI in its latest monthly bulletin. So the increasing consumption in the economy is also therefore so much waiting for these two, manufacturing and services sector revival, which is very important. And the strategy that the government took up and the extent of the packages, the three Atmanirbhar packages, meant that we had come up with about 27.1 lakh crores announced during those three packages, which constitute or which is equivalent to 13% of the GDP. And they are of such nature that it wasn't a one time, I've given it and I've, distanced myself. No, they are such commitment which have a greater multiplier impact and also which are going to be through the year and possibly into the next year also. So not only this, the one thing which stands out in India is, unlike even many of the developed countries, thanks to the way this country over the decades placed emphasis on development in vaccines, the pharma sector, and so on, today we are in a very comfortable position as regards vaccine supply, not one, not two, probably even more. Some of them getting manufactured because companies' arrangements for some formulations which have been done outside, and some which are formulated in India, manufactured in India. So I think that combination of the three Atmanirbhar package, 13% of GDP, the announcement on 1st February of a budget which sets the landscape for the next 15, 20 years, clearly does not shy away saying what this country needs. No more, if I may say, disinvestment alone, but matter of fact, taxpayers' money and the worth of what is being identified for spending the taxpayers' money, leading us to fairly openly say that privatization is one of the things. And what does privatization in the policy that I have announced mean? We are allowing Indian private sector also to seek an opportunity in reviving many of these units where further infusion of taxpayers' money is not possible, and it may not even, because it doesn't have a corollary of government managing it better. We need professionals managing it better, and such monies coming in which become more and more sharply accountable. And that is why this policy, which was announced in the budget, together with the Atmanirbhar, where the monies have gone in for such activities of multiplier giving sectors, and the budget coming up with a policy which is setting up the landscape. Not only that, we very clearly talked about infusing greater capital expenditure in infrastructure. And you know why? Infrastructure creates assets, infrastructure creates wealth, infrastructure also provides the multiplier which is so required at this kind of a time. Now, during this little opening statement, which I'm taking an opportunity to speak about a few things which post the budget I've seen discussed less, I have noticed less discussion on certain parts of the budget. The budget had a lot of things to say. The Atmanirbhar package had a lot of things to speak about. Many big ticket items are being taken up and discussions are happening. And I'm better off for all the discussions which are happening because it's giving me a lot of ideas about how to take it further when I'm executing them. But less known points, which are going to be of great importance for industry, for agriculture, for MSMEs, are things which I certainly love people to talk about, write, flag, and also to tell the government, this measure is fine, but take a caution here, that measure is okay, but you might have to fine tune it there, and so on. So I take this opportunity, Bodhisattva, to make sure that I can draw the attention of your eminent audience on those less discussed points, because I would think the budget is infused with a lot more things which are not capturing the imagination of the business leaders. I'll just flag them. I may not even get into the details because I'm sure you'll be able to get it. The financing facility for boosting agricultural infrastructure is something which I want to draw your attention. 1 lakh crores was announced, and that was announced for funding activities which will be infused for funding activities for improving the agricultural infrastructure, the farm head infrastructure, and from there to wherever the market lies for agricultural products. And the aggregation point is something which I want to underline, where industry probably will have a role to play, because that's going to help in bringing value addition for agriculture itself, India's biggest strength. Export markets are so looking up to India's agriculture. That if that's the first, the second is infrastructure development fund, 15,000 crores purely for animal husbandry infrastructure, 10 lakh hectares for improving herbal cultivation. Today, the world is looking for herbal infusion for cosmetics, herbal infusion for wellness, herbal for even some kind of allopathic medicines. So we have said 5,000 crore income generation opportunity exists for farmers here, and farmer producer organizations being with a motive of also enhancing profit for the farmers. This 10 lakh hectares for herbal is something on which agriculture and industry which is interested in agriculture should plan for their next several years. Agricultural infrastructure, again, now funding of it, you will notice I have already said that there will be an agricultural infrastructure funding cess which is announced on a very few items, but that's going to give me some substantial amount, and therefore my funding is backed up by finances. Now, increasing opportunity for industry is something, again, I'd like to flag off a few things which I think I have not found much of attraction in terms of debate post the budget. The mining policy in coal sector, which actually gives private sector participation a big chance in exploring minerals, exploring mines, and it is on a revenue sharing model. I love a lot more discussion on it, because that's what is going to open up a very big potential core sector for industry, and opportunity there for private sector. And again, in that revenue sharing model, rebate will be given for those industries who speed up on production. Suppose they're expecting to produce at a particular date and time, and if they're able to bring that date earlier, they're able to start producing earlier. Government has come up with a scheme to say you will get a rebate on anything that you have to pay to the government as a due. So incentivizing production much before the planned deadline date, that's also being given. Even better, diversified opportunities in coal sector. Again, if coal gasification and liquefaction are being planned, government is giving incentive. So it's not a quickly rustled up mining sector reform. Very little detailing, very much of little small detailing has been done, that these small things which appear small but which can be of great incentive and motivation for private sector, I would want a lot more discussion on them and public awareness built on it so that industry can rush in there. One of the other things is, of course, yesterday you saw in the Rajya Sabha, the insurance 74% of opening has been cleared in the Rajya Sabha. It will soon go to the Lok Sabha, and we will certainly come out with that as a budget announcement finding a parliamentary clearance. But I hope we have not missed out talking about, and I hope we have not forgotten that the defense production area has also moved over to automatic route and to reach at 74%. So FDI limit has been increased for the defense production also. Global hub for maintenance and repair and overall airlines. That's also something on which I would like to have industry participation and discussion on how to go about it. 800 crore, the capacity of aircraft component repairs and airframe maintenance will increase from 800 crores to 2000 crores in 3 years. There's immense opportunity for employment. Our assessment is it will probably touch 60,000 crores just for that one MRO area. Space activities are opened up. A lot of private sector can participate in providing components, making satellites and so on. That is something, again, industry should be talking about. I also will want to now highlight the fact that, having heard industry repeatedly tell me that decriminalization of Companies Act is something which is very critical. People are really worried about the aspect that if you start criminalizing every one of those little offences, it's too much of a nuisance. Even that has been decided. The Companies Act has been completely changed for that, and that will declog the NCLT to that extent. More awareness building and also talking about on that. And private companies which list non-convertible debentures on stock exchanges will not be regarded as listed companies. That was also one of the announcements made. I wouldn't take more of your time. One or two more things which I'd like to highlight here again is the development financial institution has been cleared by the cabinet and taking it to the parliament at the earliest. Even that should be coming out. And you're aware that comes with tax concessions. You're aware that that law itself is providing for private sector DFIs to come into play. That's something which is major step, I would think. And by March 2022, we will be awarding 8,500 kilometers and complete another 11,000 kilometers of national highways. That is, they are particular corridors, dedicated corridors. They're getting completed also. Shipping has gone through a major change. Flagging of merchant ships in India is a big deal. Global tenders floated by ministries and CPSCs are areas in which Indian shipping companies will be getting incentive and concessions. Ship recycling capacities are also being improved on, and that will be doubled by the year 2024, creating about 1.5 lakh more jobs. So if this growth path for India has to be really high, and for which industry, particularly private sector participation, has to be coming in, the government has brought in several such steps which will be attractive for the Indian industry to say, yes, we have no other reason now to sit back and wonder whether we can survive and prosper, but just to enter in and say, will take benefit of everything that has been announced by the government. And that way, I think returning the high growth path is possible and possible without much of a challenge. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity today.
Thank you, ma'am. We have some questions from business leaders, but I'll just start up with a quick question of my own, which is that, as you mentioned, you've obviously you moved into implementation mode very fast. The insurance bill is making its way through Parliament, and you've cleared the Rajya Sabha. It'll clear the Lok Sabha very soon. The new DFI has been cleared. Would the government be able to follow the same kind of path when it comes to privatization of the PSBs and insurance companies? Where you might face more political opposition. There was a strike, obviously, a couple of days back. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I hope to engage with all those who have any kind of reservation or hesitation on this, because I want to convey through you today, for instance, and subsequently when I engage with them, two critical points for all of us to recognize. When we are speaking about privatization, I do recognize that these units, which are probably profit-making, loss-making, efficient, inefficient, whatever they are in the economic activity producing a particular product. That is absolutely critical for the economy per se. I need that activity to continue. So my privatization is not something which is going to end up selling for closure. No, I'm selling for the business to continue. So that is one thing which we have to keep in mind. Selling for it to be continuing in business because I can't run it efficiently. One, two, I don't have more monies of that quantity that I need, that scale that I need to invest. And I need to be accountable to the taxpayers' money, and that is why I'll have to measure every one of my further infusion of equity into the public sector undertakings, because I need to be answerable for the efficiency of that every rupee. So when I privatize, I want that activity to continue efficiently, continue with more money to come in, and that could come in from the private sector. So that is one of the principles. The second principle is I will ensure that the rights of the workers, the perquisites of the workers, and all the commitments which have been made by the government for the workers there of various levels and categories are ensured. So if these two principles are there, one, that the unit will run more efficiently with more money, and two, if the workers and their concerns are being ensured and addressed by us, I think I should be able to convince and take forward the agenda.
Ma'am, one more quick question from my side, which is that you referred to obviously the recovery, the RBI's latest monthly report. You also referred to the services sector. But in this context, will the current resurgence of COVID cases, we crossed 40,000 a day worryingly yesterday, will this cause a setback and the fear of more lockdowns, which have already starting to happen in some parts of the country? What are your views in this regard? In fact, the services sector which you referred to will be the worst hit. I mean, sectors like hotels and restaurants and tourism will be the worst hit if there is more restrictions on activity. What kind of a risk to recovery do you see because of the resurgence of COVID cases?
Yes, we recognize the fact that this resurgence of the COVID cases will be a matter worrying all our minds, not just in the government, but also the industry. I'm grateful that the Prime Minister has engaged with the Chief Ministers to say that all of us will have to work together on this to ensure that in some parts of the country where there is a spike, that has to be immediately addressed. There is also this planning up for ramping up the vaccine being given to the citizens, both from the supply and also the execution point of view. So with the further such focused efforts, I hope that the concern which the upsurge in the incidence of COVID will be addressed, And because that immediate response from the government is seen and we like to continue that monitoring, I think we will be able to address the concerns about the spike in the COVID cases. However, it just definitely requires a lot of watching out for.
Right. Thank you. Let's go over to our business leaders. May I request Mr. Sajjan Jindal, the chairman of the JSW Group, to ask a question?
Thank you for this opportunity, Madam Finance Minister. First of all, I must congratulate you and Prime Minister Modi's government on handling this pandemic phenomenally well. When many countries in the world are still struggling, I think India has done extremely well in achieving the goal. On the economic front, the fiscal stimulus that has been given to the vulnerable society, the extent of credit that has gone to MSME, and the falling interest rates and unprecedented, flow of foreign exchange that has made India the fourth largest foreign exchange reserves country, after beating Russia, is some of the factors which has gone very strongly in your favor, and your leadership has really brought about all these changes. My question to you is that in this post-pandemic time, when the crude oil is going through the roof and it's already touched $70 and our dependence on crude oil is 88% of the import. So what kind of impact it will have on inflation, also the super cycle on commodities, which is affecting inflation. Would you continue to continue the benign interest rates regime, or will you think that the inflation is going to hurt us and you will start to think in terms of increasing the interest rates and reducing the growth rate of the country?
Yes, these are very critical issues given the context. The Petroleum Ministry is very keen on looking for alternative sources of crude supply. That's of course not going to affect the price, but at least the supply will be sustained, and without any disruption we should be able to get the crude. But even with that said, the price is something on which I've been open speaking about it, because what the central government collects, it is shared with the states, as much as this being one of those very serious issues on the basis of which people would raise questions on its impact on inflation itself. However, I think both center and states will have to talk about it. It cannot be any more competitive from the point of view you reduce or I reduce. I think overall we'll have to look at the consumer. And overall, again, not just the consumer, but also the ripple effect it can have on the economy itself. So that is one thing which I would be able to say, but whether that is going to have an immediate effect, I'll have to wait and see when the council meets, when the GST council meets. But the food and the food related inflation, I think the group of ministers who's empowered to look at this essential services, essential goods, essential commodities is meeting very often and making sure that supply distortions because of any seasonal changes or because of crop patterns or because of output are all managed well in advance. And the classic example of the tomatoes, onions and potatoes is something which we have seen, that the prices rise, but as much as the rise in the same speed, it also comes down the moment the supply comes into the market. We are closely monitoring that so that that doesn't come into distorting any further. And overall on the commodities, even the core sector products, there is a lot of concern, whether it is copper, whether it is steel, and these are kind of essentials, especially when the economy is struggling to revive. And this is where the demand should be consistent and business planning should not be affected. I am sitting in consultation with a lot of people to see how best I can handle that. And therefore, I think because RBI, the government, the empowered committee, all of us are repeatedly sitting and discussing, we should be able to come out with a good outcome.
May I request Mr. S. N. Subramaniam to ask his question?
Honorable Finance Minister, pleasure talking to you through the ET forum. First of all, credit to you, the Honorable Prime Minister, and the entire government for handling the pandemic so very well. I think we have more or less come on top of it. Second, thanks for a fantastically blockbuster budget. I have two questions. Number one, many of the infrastructure projects have suffered due to one, the pandemic, and beyond that, the various time that it takes through either the dispute arbitration or arbitration process to settle. Can we apply our mind to see whether a better system can be found out to settle disputes across the table? Number two, how do we find an effective solution to see whether long gestation capex projects, especially in the infrastructure, can be financed through long gestation, cheaper funds, which can be made available either through LIC or EPF or such other sources which are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Subramaniam. On the disputes, I don't know if you're referring to states and center or commercial enterprises and states. Since 2019, I think there's been a lot of concern about how agreements will have to be respected and how and what kind of an impact they can have if any state sort of reneges on the agreed such agreements, and how are those kind of disputes going to be sorted out. There's a lot of engagement with the states and also with the corporates which have been affected. I don't know whether I can get into greater details of talking about it now, but that is an area in which we are working to make sure that commercial contracts, commercial agreements are all respected, and what is it that we can do in such situation for quick redressal through dispute mechanisms which can address such disputes as they arise. But as regards financing for long-term infrastructure building and also for projects which are long-term in nature, I think we have indicated more than one step, whether it is the forming of the DFI, about which I mentioned in my speech. We are getting it to the Parliament at the earliest. We are also giving a space, legally, a legislated space for private sector also to come into funding long-term projects. We are engaged with a lot of sovereign funds. We are also talking to globally large pension funds to make sure that they can, because they have the patience to endure a long-term investment. They are deep pocket enough to also come and take up such investments. So whether through the NIIF or through the DFI, which I am now forming, we are making sure that we are already engaging with the sovereign funds and pension funds of the world to make sure that their interest, meaning that their commitment towards investing in India, is given all kinds of information, so that the moment we are coming up with the DFI, we will have greater investments coming in. The NIIF, the National Investment Infrastructure Fund, is also on its own engaging with many of these global big funds to see how best they can be brought in for infrastructure. Tax benefits have been given for many of these sovereign funds. So I think that work will set the pace for infrastructure and project financing in India.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is from Vibha Padalkar, the MD and CEO of HDFC Life.
Honorable Madam Finance Minister, restarting our investment cycle and for India to reach the 5 trillion GDP aspiration is very, very critical. So in this context, what role do you see long-term money managers like insurers and pension companies playing in this journey, as well as what other reforms can we expect? For example, the way credit bureaus have helped NBFCs, banks, small finance banks really take off and grow. Can we have a repository of medical information, for example, perhaps piggybacking on Aadhaar? Another initiative could be, for example, portability between different retirement solutions, for example, from EPF to NPS and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Vibhaji. There's definitely a benefit which I recognize on behalf of the government when engagements of such nature can happen with industry. And I will tell you, during COVID, the Indian venture capital funds people kept engaging with us, telling us specifically about ways in which the Indian money can come into investing in industry. Indian investors be drawn into investments for long-term financing. Indian venture capital to come in and play in building the economy. All this happened because the venture capital funding people were constantly engaging with us to say, you can do this, if not do that. And there was a lot of sharing of thoughts. I would invite you, Ms. Vibha Padalkar, to definitely give me your thoughts on how best we can do this data sharing, and also on the fungibility. It's a very important point on which there is some kind of a discussion happening in the government. So I honestly invite you to send me a paper if you can, or else we can fix a time and talk with a few interested people and responsible people in the government. Responsible in the sense those who are competent, given that area of activity for them to handle. So all of us can sit and talk about it with you and get some useful workable ideas.
Thank you. The last question is from Amit Agarwal of Amazon.
Thank you for the opportunity, Honorable Finance Minister. My question is, how do you envision the role of a global supply chain in realizing the goal of an Atmanirbhar Bharat? And what role do you see the industry play? Thank you.
Global supply chain, companies who are in that area have a lot to do. I honestly invite you to engage with government to understand where we are in the government on it and what is it that you can do for us. In fact, value chain is something which can make or break possible opportunities which exist. And you, who have an exposure to the global value chain spread across several countries, can actually tell us your experiences elsewhere, can tell us about the experience of government and commercial enterprise interface. Where are the best practices available? Where it is a win-win for everybody. Government on the one hand, the citizen on the other, and if anything, the stakeholder who is the company who has the value chain, network in their command. So I would think engagement itself opens up opportunities, but greater engagement towards understanding each other's requirements is very required in a country like India, which is an emerging market, emerging out of, I would think, decades of slow growth, decades of a different framework where it wasn't possible for enterprise to speed up. And therefore, this engagement, I would think, is mutually beneficial and it can address a lot of misconceptions.
Right. Thank you, Finance Minister. I'll just put in a couple of questions since we have you with us. I'll just put in a couple of other questions. Because of the rising bond yields in the US, there is talk of some kind of a, because the fear of that the stimulus, the Biden stimulus might lead to inflation after some time. There is talk of a global, of a repetition of the taper tantrum of 2013, because what happens when the Fed starts pulling back and so on. And according to a recent S&P report, India could be vulnerable or could be among the more countries which are more vulnerable to a taper tantrum. So what are your views on this? Has the government, because there has been some impact on markets already, and I think you wouldn't deny that during the pandemic, because although the situation is gloomy, the rise in the markets has created a general feeling of well-being, or is one of the bright spots during this rather grim period. So what are your views on a taper tantrum, and how seizes the government of this possibility, of this danger?
Well, first of all, I think we've learned a lot of lessons, not just us, the Reserve Bank has learned a lot of lessons post the 2013 taper tantrum, and also the way in which many things were left loose rather than tie up and close the ends which were to be closed. And so when things were left rather unattended, it sort of coiled back and hit back. And those kind of obvious lessons which were there for everyone to see, I think we've had quite a few sittings and discussing with the RBI on it. And the way in which it appears now because there's a greater sync between RBI and the government, we are keeping a good watch, and I don't think India faces that risk of taper tantrum repeating now. We are carefully monitoring the situation and taking every such step, small, immediate, to make sure that the path is fairly clear for the stimulus to work and the revival to happen.
You referred to, I mean, there was one question was about inflation, the dangers of higher inflation and whether it could lead to higher interest rates in India. So in this context, I think we are now in the process of reviewing the 2 to 6% band, right? And we are supposed to complete this exercise by the end of this month. Is there any possibility of changing it, or are we sticking with the current range?
There's a lot of discussion. I don't think we've concluded it yet.
Right. So another deadline which is also coming up, I think, in a few days is the 1 year of the IBC. The suspension of the IBC. Where do we stand on that?
The suspension of the IBC comes to an end on the 25th of March.
That's right. We just
Yeah. We'll have to see how the ground is, how we've been working on it to see where we stand. We also want to make sure that injury or any kind of, withdrawing of steps don't hurt the industry. Yet we need to get back to normalcy. All these, factors are being discussed. The parliament is in session also. We'll see
Right.
how it goes.
Okay. And what about a framework for the fiscal deficit? Is there some, for the new glide path and so on? Where are we on that? I mean, are you likely to announce something soon, or?
I think we indicated somewhat in the budget. In fact, fairly clearly, we've indicated it, and this year or the coming year, we've given ourselves a reasonable expectation in terms of the fiscal deficit. I wasn't going to rush to get to the right number at the earliest, because the economy cannot be hurt even as it is reviving. So I think fairly elaborately the budget has narrated our intention on that.
And has the government started, I mean, identified the public sector banks which is, which could be privatized?
No, not yet.
Let me just, to ask a last kind of a last question. In the general Atmanirbhar program, there are essentially two components of that. I mean, there's one is obviously the PLI, which is a production incentive scheme. But the government has also raised import tariffs on a very wide range of products, ranging from toys to textiles to a lot of other consumer goods, in order to incentivize domestic production. And there has been some talk. There was, in fact, I think Professor Arvind Panagaria was quoted in the papers this morning as saying that the process of liberalization has been reversed. And that old, goal of reaching ASEAN levels of tariff that is now in cold storage. So, do you see a kind of a creeping import substitution happening, and the dangers of that? Because we followed that for the first 50 years of our independent existence.
No, actually, the import substitution that we are talking about and the Atmanirbhar that we are talking about is something on which all of us have spent a lot of time, particularly in the context of the Atmanirbhar announcements and the budget related announcements where you're actually extracting those tariff things that I've come up with, where I've raised the tariff for certain imports. We've spent a lot of time in the government sitting and thinking about it. The Atmanirbhar and the import substitution is not blindly saying, oh, stop every import. I can be Atmanirbhar particularly when I produce equal global standard goods, which I can produce here and I am producing here, but if imports hurt me even as I do the production here, both in terms of competently selling for domestic market and also possibly exporting, I need to give them that kind of a support. So it's not going back to the socialist India where I don't want any imports coming in. I want imports to come in, particularly in the areas where they are intermediary goods, they are raw materials, they are something which is critical for my manufacturing to become competitive. So I've been very selective about the items on which I've raised the tariff. Essentially, if you look at it, they are all final consumer goods which are being produced in India. I have not raised the tariff on intermediary, or I'm not raised on critical raw materials. And sometimes when it is a question of seeing the inconsistency between the FTA regime and a MFN, you see that many things which if you raise here come back to you through the FTA regime. Even these kinds of inconsistencies have been pointed out by the industry themselves to us. So rationalizing on the duty has had all these principles being before us and driving us to have that Atmanirbhar framework. So it is not Atmanirbhar of the socialist era.
So, thank you, ma'am, for these exhaustive answers to all the questions and for gracing this rather virtual and rather unique version of the ET Awards. Look forward to seeing you physically at the next ET Awards, hopefully. But thank you so much on behalf of all of us at ET.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you, Bodhi, and of course, our CEO guests. There was so much we learned from that. Hope all of you are also tweeting #ET Awards. It's time to present the first set of ET Awards for Corporate Excellence. Now, all of us agree India needs to empower its disempowered. Few of us do anything about it, and still fewer actually devote their professional life to it. It is to honor this vital spirit of social entrepreneurship that we have instituted a new award, the ET Evoke Social Entrepreneur of the Year. And the first winner is Neelam Chibber, who runs the Industry Foundation. Congratulations on this well-deserved win.
Hi, I'd really like to thank the Economic Times for the ET Evoke Award for Social Entrepreneur of the Year. It's such a great honor to be a representative not only of my organization, industry, which works extremely hard to reach the goals that it has set out for itself. It's also a great honor to represent the sector. So I stand on the back, as an organization, industry stands on the back of all the giants in the sector who have gone before us. I'd really love to acknowledge them and really honor the amount of hard work that has gone into this sector to bring it up into the limelight. I'd like to thank the nominating organizations, I'd love to thank the jury, and definitely Economic Times for having brought out such an award which can highlight the amount of innovative work that is happening for social inclusion within the country. We all stand here on the backs of the communities we work with and for. It is amazing to see their resilience, to see their never say die attitude and the positive energy that emanates from the women we work with. I'd really love to call them out along with all the supporters, such as our donors, our investors, the markets, the organizations that buy from these value chains. Without you, this model would really not stand. And finally, I would once again call out for the importance of the sector, for the fact that we have more than maybe 100 to 200 million artisans in the country, and the fact that we all need to come together, governments, the private sector, and civil society, to solve these really complex problems, not only for the sake of inclusive growth in India, but also globally. Globally, we have more than 1 billion artisans, and India can really show the path to finding a solution for this sector and the problems that assail us so that we can attain the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
How many of you have a heart as big as your net worth? I can confidently say, looking at my net worth, that my heart is way bigger. But I can also confidently say that the one company whose heart is as big as its huge market cap is Tata Consultancy Services, which carries on the splendid Tata tradition of doing good. And it is therefore entirely unsurprising that in difficult times when companies can do so much to help others, TCS is the Corporate Citizen of the Year. Congratulations.
Good day, everyone. On behalf of my fellow TCSers, with utmost humility and gratitude, I thank the Economic Times and the jury for honoring TCS with the Corporate Citizen Award. For over 152 years, Tata Group has operated as a purpose-driven organization with the principle that what is good for the community is good for our business. At TCS, we are embodying this ethos for over 52 years through our long efforts in building a digital India. As we harness the power of this digital technologies to lead companies and countries on a growth and transformation journey, we are equally committed to our societal mission of connecting people to opportunities in this digital economy. We are making sustained long-term CSR investment to address top national challenges to create large-scale societal impact and generational improvement for women, youth, and marginalized groups. Together, let us build an equitable and inclusive future for all. Thank you.
I am one of those people who would rather sell their car than read through the fine print of their car insurance policy. I also want to ensure my sense of humor, but insurance agents I meet say they don't know what that is, which is very hurtful. Okay, no more jokes about insurance. The next winner, ICICI Lombard, has produced such spectacular results that it's laughed its way to bag the award of Emerging Company of the Year. Congratulations.
I'm delighted to accept the Emerging Company of the Year award on behalf of my team at ICICI Lombard. I would like to thank the organizing team at Economic Times, the entire Times Group, and the eminent jury for giving us this honor. And I would like to dedicate this award to our 26 million customers, more than 100,000 distribution partners, and more than 10,000 employees who make ICICI Lombard the company it is. Since 2001, when the industry got opened up, the insurance industry has made tremendous progress. And I see this award also a recognition of the role the industry plays in the economy at large. Our journey at ICICI Lombard also started in 2001, 19 years back. And in a sense, we are just emerging out of our teenage years into young adulthood. As we get into the energetic 20s, I hope and wish that we remain as youthful, as curious, and as emerging in the days ahead. Thank you again.
One of the great things about ET Awards is that people who really matter get together to talk about things that really matter. And so, ladies and gentlemen, here's our panel of top-notch CEOs. First up, Sajjan Jindal, Chairman, JSW Group. S.N. Subramanian, CEO and MD, Larsen & Toubro. Bhavish Agarwal, co-founder and CEO, Ola. Amit Agarwal, country head, Amazon India. Vibha Vadalkar, MD and CEO, HDFC Life. Now, this blue chip panel will discuss the absolute top of the mind issue, life after COVID, the challenge of jobs and growth. Arijit Burman, Deputy Resident Editor, The Economic Times, will be moderating this wonderful and insightful discussion. Here goes.
Thank you, Cyrus, and good evening, everyone. A novel coronavirus, possibly transmitted by animals sold at a market in the Chinese city of Wuhan, spread to create one of the worst global crises since the Second World War in 2020. Since then, we have braced the new normal in businesses and in our everyday lives as politicians and central banks across the world pulled out their fiscal bazookas to defend economies. This new crisis has also given way to newer, bolder opportunities and policy shifts to tackle growth, employment, and survival. To talk about how businesses have tweaked and maneuvered these troubled times, we have a very diverse panel. So let's dive straight in. SNS, if I want to come straight to you, by and large, from the beginning of this year, 2021, there is a lot of vaccine optimism that is sweeping the world. Vaccines clearly are the new instruments of soft power. Even China wants to leverage that. They're building capacities in Africa and other emerging markets. What role can we in India play both in terms of manufacturing as well as R&D in the field of synthetic biology?
Tough question to answer for me, Arjit. I can build the vaccine factories, but having said that, I think the paradigm of the world, as much as we knew, has totally shifted. Mm-hmm. And to a large extent, though we thought the pandemic was over, again there is resurgence of it here and there. And everywhere in the world, nobody wants you to come and meet. Everybody says, come over Team, come over Zoom, something like that. There's some uncertainty going on. So I think some confidence booster is required. And I think that is where the Atmanirbhar idea that the Prime Minister floated, I think has really taken off, especially in this area of vaccine. Mm-hmm. It's really remarkable that two Indian companies, one at Pune and one at Hyderabad, did come out with the vaccine. Many of us have had the luck to have it, and many others, nearly 24 million Indians have had it so far. And that the country is also using it to leverage its diplomatic soft power, if you would like to call that, to move it across is a phenomenal thing. What we need to understand in the immediate vicinity of our country, especially in Middle East, certain parts of Africa, even certain parts of CS, etc., there's a fair amount of Indian diaspora. Mm-hmm. Many of them have also been prevented from traveling out, moving around in these countries because of the spread of corona. Right. And they have been under severely harsh conditions therein, because much of these Indians who are there are not the high type Indians. Many of them are working class and laborers, etc., who had gone there to earn the extra bread. And they have really suffered quite a bit due to the restrictions imposed by these countries. Some of them took advantage of the flight back home and came, but many of them are still there for various reasons. Right. I think by using, by one, inventing the vaccine, one by, first of all, testing it on our own citizens in many ways, including after the vaccines having gone through the rigorous process. And second, using it as a method to say that we are also willing to export it to other countries in spite of a huge population, much of it is yet to be vaccinated. I think it's a phenomenal way of going about how India looks to not only ourselves, but also look to the immediate neighborhood and to the world at large. That we also send it across to continents like South America and others, Brazil, and few other countries is also a remarkable show of how we are willing to stretch ourselves beyond what is required.
Bhavish, someone who offers, as a company, mobility solutions, what role, say, can private sector play in this massive rollout of vaccines?
I actually believe the way India has handled this pandemic under the leadership of the Prime Minister, it shows India's ethos to the world, the ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, of, the whole world is a family, and of our inclusive, empathetic approach to life in general, the discipline our society has, and also our outlook to people, beyond our shores, right? And the other thing that I believe the way the Prime Minister and the government has really inflected towards a much more stronger push for the industry, with the slogan of Atmanirbhar Bharat. I believe the slogan of Atmanirbhar Bharat is one of an outward-looking India, an India which can actually become a much stronger part of global supply chains and leverage Indian strengths in technology, R&D, manufacturing, and really use this geopolitical situation also in a way to gain an advantage, this disproportionate advantage on the global stage. Now, given that macro picture, I believe the future for new technologies is very bright in India, and companies like ourselves, like many others in the digital space, in the new technology, new energy space, this is going to be a massive positive if we leverage that opportunity. That's one major theme that I feel Indian industry will really step up to. The second is, given the situation on the vaccination drive, like you mentioned in India, recently the government has also opened up private hospitals, nursing homes to provide the vaccination drive much more impetus and much more parallelization. And I believe in due course that will only strengthen with more and more companies getting access to possibly distributing these vaccines to their employees, or their a platform like us would love to distribute these kind of vaccines to our drivers. We have more than 1 million drivers across the country. So we are engaging with the government to see how we can lend our weight into this and help accelerate the whole vaccination drive.
Mr. Jindal and Mr. Subramaniam, one thing, we started by talking about vaccine optimism sweeping the whole world, but one offshoot of that is the recent inflationary trends and increases in input prices. Just when we were tiptoeing our way out of slowdown or recession, we are faced with these challenges. How are your companies handling this, and what do you think is happening? How are others also dealing with this issue?
So Arijit, I think the way the world has tried to tackle this pandemic and try to come out of this recessionary situation, every country in the world printed a lot of money, and a huge amount of liquidity has been pumped into the system, and every country is working on to build infrastructure, spend that money on building infrastructure and various other activities, which is inflationary in nature by sheer the amount of money that has been put into the system. Correct. So this is very clearly was known that this kind of extra money that is pumped into the system will be inflationary. On top of that, we are seeing the oil prices touching $70, which is not helping either the inflation. So this is a problem, and also there is a commodity super cycle, as we call it within our organization, that it's a commodity super cycle. All commodities, the prices have really.
You will be very happy.
For a short term, one would make more money, but it's I don't know if it's good for the world, but for the moment, prices have gone up a lot. Input prices have gone up, as well as the selling prices have gone up. So cost of projects have gone up, and SNS, of course, would like to talk about that. But that has kind of affected. But I think we have to take it in our stride that this inflation will be there, and I hope the government does not come heavy on controlling the inflation by restricting the growth in the economy. Because as of today, as we speak, what is very important is to grow the economy and to give more jobs to the people and take the economy into a different cycle and different level. That is what is important. And we, as government has rightly done, they have accepted that they will they will play around with a higher fiscal deficit just for that purpose, so that for 1 year we need to come out of this crisis that we had.
Correct. Mr. Subramanian, is India worried that suddenly we are facing these headwinds?
As Sajjan correctly said, this is expected, right? World over, we have seen huge currency being printed. One advantage we had was the lower oil prices. Unfortunately, due to OPEC getting together and curtailing oil production, oil prices have also gone up. And people are not using the strategic reserves. And on top of it, we saw Qatar joining back the Middle East regime, and thereby further cartelization is taking place from that point of view. We're getting hit from all sides. Excess notes in circulation, Middle East oil prices going up. So I think we got to learn to live with it for some time to come. The best way to look at it is that ultimately we got to see what is good for the country. From my point of view, the biggest crisis facing them today is creation of jobs. And as Keynes once said, dig your way out of the trouble. So as Sajjan correctly said, we just got to dig a hole everywhere and hope to cover it with concrete and steel to see that we get out of the trouble. And for digging the road and covering it up with some concrete, we got to spend some money. I guess we got to do it. I only hope that it doesn't get out of control from that point of view, but I guess there are very good managers from the economic and other point of view handling that part of it, and thereby we get over it. And the only way today to create jobs is by getting onto projects, by getting onto various forms of creation of job opportunities, and just employ people, because millions and millions have gone back home.
Correct.
Back to the villages, etc. And there's a lot of unemployment, both in the rural as well as in the urban areas. People have lost jobs. We got to get them back into some kind of activity, and that's only job and some fair wage for that. And the only way to do it is forget about everything but create jobs. And that means some inflation. I guess we got to live with it.
And that gives me the cue to ask the next question to Vibha. That, another very important issue is the fact that social security is no longer a marginal issue. It's very much mainstream, and the pandemic has actually compounded that. How do we design, a safety net that is A, both fiscally prudent, and B, relevant socially as well? I mean, it's a tough balancing act. How do we do that? And as an add-on, I would say, how do we make India a far more pension society, because our savings are also coming down. So unless or until you are a government servant, chances are that you will remain vulnerable.
Absolutely, Arijit. And it has to be done in a calibrated basis, and but at the same time, some level of injection, if you like, or encouragement, call it what you may. People don't wake up and say that, I need to protect my family, or we live in a sense of optimism, which is good, but doesn't really make ends meet. And today, if you were to look at even the unemployment numbers right at the beginning of the pandemic, we did go through some level of shock. Yes, we hopefully are light at the end of the tunnel and so on, but large portion of our workforce is in the sector that does not have assured pension. And also pension assets as a percentage of GDP is less than 5%. So woefully inadequate. Of course, this I'm talking about non-governmental regular people, either salaried or self-employed. Similarly, you need insurance to drive a car, but you don't need insurance to live your life. And so on. So, and being a breadwinner and so on. Lots of things are being done by the government. Absolutely brilliant in terms of JAM Trinity, the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and then mobility solutions and compulsory bank account, so that direct benefit transfers go and there's very little leakage. But I think next step is something that we can look at as a country. We can look at how there are structural changes in even small aspects, such as how pension is looked at. How does one make it compulsory for people to put money aside? And also some initiatives, for example, can we look at every Indian the way we have Aadhaar, one retirement number, and there is enough portability, whether from EPFO to NPS and so on. some little bit of sweetener. Today we do have ATCCD, but can we look at it being more broad-based to encourage people to look after themselves?
If we are saving less, we are certainly spending more. And Amit, you have a unique opportunity, and perspective of to gauge these changing consumer behaviors in both in US as well as in India. How has a customer or a consumer evolved in the last 1 year, in the last 12 months of pandemic and lockdowns around the world?
Yeah, I think firstly, I would say COVID has surely highlighted the importance of just digital and online in lives and livelihoods of people. And I think a way to answer your question is to look at consumers and businesses together. It's more of a network effect, and I'll tell you why. So very obviously, customers have structurally moved towards shopping online, both in terms of coverage. Pretty much 100% of PIN codes in India shop now online for surely, because we know on Amazon they do, and in terms of the diversity of stuff that they buy, last year has had people move more into essentials than they were before. So that has become a more integral part of their daily lives. I think for me, what's more interesting is how businesses are embracing technology and becoming more robust online businesses, and this whole new trend of going direct to consumers, for a business to have an idea that they're working backwards from the customer, and they are targeting a very specific need, which might be small if you thought about traditional distribution, but when you are powered with technology as a lever, your access costs go down tremendously. So, to your point, how customer behaviors are evolving, there are some interesting brands. Like there's this brand called Slurp, started by two moms. They wanted to get good, healthy snacks for their kids. And now they've created a brand. That brand is now going global. They're growing to become
Indian
actually
brand,
businesses.
correct?
Yeah, Indian brands. And then there is a brand called To Be Honest, which is kind of this 100% veggie snacks brand. There's a toy brand started by a couple that they wanted to make toys for their kids and grandchildren. And all of these are examples where a very specific need that is targeting, whether it's the desire to be healthy, desire to be organic, desire to be Indian, desire to be aspirational, they are becoming brands. And these brands are being conceived not just as brands within India, but to become global brands. And online is becoming a big enabler of that.
I wanted to ask you, how has work from home impacted your workforce and the consumers? You're actually increasing your headcount around the world, at the same time telling people that you can work from home, no need to come to office, probably till 2022, if I'm not mistaken.
No, we are much more hopeful how things might improve in the world. It's till June of 2021, but 95% of our workforce is working from home. And I would say, we are very grateful and fortunate to be in an industry where we can be effective to a large extent in the corporate side. But we have a very large operations team. The people on the ground in our warehouses, logistics, on the delivering products to customers. And to your question, how things have changed, obviously our number one priority is the safety and the well-being of all of these employees, including the ones that are working from home, because different kind of behaviors seep in as people are working from home. They kind of become isolated. They're trying to figure out how do they interact with their peers and colleagues and so on. Now we had to make significant process changes on the ground to make people safe. But I think for me, if I just step back, this whole period, I'm personally a very optimistic person in general, and I feel that what this has done is it has highlighted how people have become just more innovative. So if you look at the number of ideas that have come across during this phase within our company, I can look at many things, whether there is a team that built an Alexa skill that allowed onboarding of employees from home. So because it's a voice assistant, you can actually engage with your employees from your mobile phone. So that's a very interesting, to a machine learning model that allows our associates to realize if they are within 6 feet of somebody else so that they can keep safe. So just a whole suite of ideas that have evolved. And more importantly, I think this period would test the culture, the leadership principles, and the mechanisms of companies and leaders so that they can lead beyond their line of sight. And I feel that if you have those robust mechanisms, you would actually come out of this far stronger, more kinder, more inclusive, because you've kind of learned to be more respectful of people's perspectives and in the way that we interact with each other, and more resilient as a workforce. So I think when we return to normal, I'm very hopeful that we're going to bring in the in-person collaboration, inventiveness, the goodness of that, and layer on it the flexibility of work from home and the inclusivity that we have learned from our experience over the last 1 year. And I think it would probably create more effective teams.
Correct. Bhavesh, the energy landscape clearly is changing very, very rapidly. And, and the pandemic has probably made the climate change narrative far more mainstream. You're building the world's largest two-wheeler EV plant. What prompted you to pivot?
Ajit, it's a very important phase in the journey of sustainability today. And I believe COVID has accelerated this change. And this change is not, first and foremost, this change is not led by businesses today. All stakeholders, be it the average citizen, be it investors, be it governments, and be it businesses, everybody is much more socially conscious. And I think COVID has just enhanced the awareness of the risks as a society that we carry because of climate change and because of other health issues, right? So all across the board, there's a lot more social awareness. In fact, we've seen because of COVID, after COVID, many countries, including India, including many countries in Europe, have increased their pledge for others, governmental support for transition to sustainable mobility and sustainable energy. And we're in a unique time where there's this enhanced social awareness in all stakeholders, and the technology for delivering sustainability at scale is also maturing. And it's not yet fully mature. The cost curves, the supply chains are not yet there, but we are getting there. Right? So these two mega themes, I believe, will completely transform the mobility industry and obviously the energy industry. And when I look at our business, if you look at the electric vehicle journey of the last decade across the world, most of the focus has been on large format Western style products, be it the pickup trucks in America or luxury sedans, or in China also large SUVs. Because most of the EV disruptors have either been an American company or a Chinese company. Now, when you look at the mass of the world, majority of the vehicles around the world, majority of the energy consumed by vehicles is in what I would call urban mobility vehicles, be it two-wheelers, three-wheelers, hatchbacks, urban sedans, etc. Cars that brands like Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Renault, etc. would make. Now, nobody is really looking to electrify that segment, and this, by the way, is a majority of all vehicles sold in the world and a majority of energy consumed by all vehicles in the world. So our ambition has been to build a global scale business, global quality business for electric mobility out of India. We aim to manufacture in India, leverage the Indian R&D capabilities, invest heavily in R&D here in India. And the first step in that direction is the two-wheeler business, because India is the world's largest two-wheeler market.
Mr. Jindal, you are a power producer yourself, as well as a large user of energy in your steel plants. Coal in India remains the key source in our energy basket, even though renewables have made a massive strides. But once gasified into hydrogen, that coal itself can also become clean. So how are companies such as yourself are adapting to these new changing landscapes?
So we are into two separate businesses which are both consuming coal. One is power generation, and one is making steel in blast furnaces using met coal. So here again, I see a great opportunity for India to be a global leader, is to move from coal-based power generation to a power producer which can use renewable power. I mean, we have, as India, we have moved along quite well in taking sort of a leadership position in renewable. but I think we ought to do much more and much faster. So if the government takes a view on this, that we need to make India coal-free by 2025, maybe 2030 at the most, where Coal India must shut down and all the coal mining must shut down. You know, I'm making a very big statement, but this is something which we as a country we need to do. And I was mentioning before we started that I went to Dhanushkodi because I see a huge potential of wind power generation in that part of India. And it's unbelievable that we have so much energy being wasted. We have so much solar, we have so much sun, so much wind. Coming to the steel business, these are early days when we are talking about hydrogen to be the fuel for burning for reducing iron ore into steel, into iron. Globally, a lot of companies are doing the R&D, and we are also working at JSW Steel. We are also working overtime to see how we can convert our existing steel plants and reduce our carbon footprint, how we can reduce the carbon input through the coal route into the blast furnaces.
Mr. Subramaniam, one thing is what every boardroom's discussing, I guess, along with energy security, is of course de-risking supply chain. Everyone's looking at a China plus one strategy. Which segments, if India Inc. can play a significant role in this shifting supply chain of global companies and corporations?
I think this is a deep-rooted question which hinges on many factors, including development of infrastructure within the country. During this pandemic, beyond the pandemic, when China made incursions into a border, I think we all got together as a nation and as people put together a process by which, where certain excess dependence were there on China supplied items, we, in a desperate manner, even as Larsen and Toubro, tried to shift it all back to other supply sources, including trying to do many things on our own within the country.
Right.
It is also a fact that when the COVID hit, there were many supply chain situations from Western Europe and even the United States, which got very badly hit. Those countries went into total lockdown. And luckily for me, the Amit and Bhavishas have still not found e-com solution to put up a steel plant or a power plant. So we are still in business. And all the businesses that we have need supply chain from across the world, not only from India, because some of the products are yet to be made in India that efficiently or is still not there from a technology point of view. This accelerated the requirement to do things within the country. It's not only us, but I find a slew of MSMEs, SMEs, and even other organizations have taken upon themselves to find out indigenous solutions, to put together mechanisms to manufacture or produce solutions within the country.
And that's where I guess the PLI schemes also will play a big role.
Yes, the PLI scheme will play a big role. The easing of monetary situation will play a big role. The ability that we can do it ourselves, that feeling that has come in many of us, that why depend on others, we can do something on our own, it's a feel-good factor that has come in. The general attitude of the world towards China, the need to take manufacturing out of China into other countries, including in India, is going to play a very big role in that. The fact that the world still needs cost-effective solutions, and China is not the only country which can provide cost-effective economical solutions, but there are other parts of the world it can produce, which includes primarily India, is a big factor in our favor. That we have a fairly vibrant democracy with good court system and a system which is reasonably stable, it makes a big difference to how the world looks at making things in India. I think all these things come together, but essentially, when you need to have a very efficient supply chain system functioning beyond technology and products, I think you need a very effective infrastructure. When I say very effective infrastructure, the port should function efficiently, the road system should function efficiently, the way to transport goods and services should function efficiently. It's come a long way. It's come a very long way, especially today when you go down the road system, enormous development has taken place. ports predominantly have got privatized. Airport cargo and airports themselves have got privatized. So there is, I'm not trying to say government is not efficient, but the general feeling is when it is done privately through private sector organization, things are generally more efficient and less bureaucratic. I think there's one tax, one nation, and such things that the government has brought on is making the supply chain and efficiency come and enforce into the system in many ways beyond what many people have thought about. So I think there is a way forward, and this should result in good stead for us.
May I come in on
Yes,
this
of course, please.
point? Because I know that India Inc. is going to be watching this program, and so I believe very strongly that India has a huge capacity to ancillarize, to produce the products which China has been supplying to the Indian industry. Especially if you look at the auto industry or for the white goods industry, everything China kind of captured out of Indian manufacturing. A company which was, for example, which was making compressors in India, they have become what do you call, assemblers. They import all the components because China started throwing at such cheap rates that everybody became assemblers. So I think it is very important, as SNS rightly said, that after the insurgents on the borders, we also at JSW decided that we will not bring anything from China. And the good part and the good fallout of that is that now a lot of industries have our ancillaries have come up who are now supplying to us.
Can I also just make a thank you? I think the points mentioned by Mr. Jindal and Mr. SNS are all very relevant. I would like to add that in addition to bringing supply chains here, one more area where India Inc. should really focus on is in technologies of the future and making India a leader in the supply chains of the future. For example, in the auto components industry, bringing the cell manufacturing here in India, and not just doing partnerships with other global companies, but doing the R&D here in India.
Sure, Biva, everyone's talking about, we are running really out of time, but two quick points. Firstly, to Biva, everyone's talking about physical infrastructure. There's another very critical issue now, post-pandemic, of course, which is cybersecurity and cyber infrastructure. Have we woken up to this, clear and present danger?
I think we are, at least I can speak for the larger financial services sector, including banks and insurers and mutual funds and so on, pension companies, very, very bright and center of how we look at risk. And we are handling customer data. So very, very critical, apart from data being siphoned out, but even sharing customer data is a complete no-no, it being available in the dark web and so on. So, so can we do more? Yes, we can, and more so because of this entire work from home. A lot of it was physically protected, which now is really work from anywhere in the planet, and we are handling data. But at the same time, I don't think because of that threat, we should have additional somewhat retrograde, curbs as we start getting back to work.
Amit, last word to you. Both, Amazon as well as Bhavish's Ola, they represent the young millennial world. But as a country, are we leveraging enough the fact that we are the largest cohort of the young population that is below 35, both in terms of technology as well as innovation and human capital management?
Well, I mean, you have great ideas that have been just shared in this segment out here by my colleagues. I would say that sometimes it is easy to miss the really small but meaningful innovations that are happening on an everyday basis in the broader ecosystem. And I do have the good fortune to kind of see the small businesses be resourceful and inventive. And I talked about this direct-to-consumer trend as an example, where people are creating very creative brands to serve consumers. And the fact that during COVID, 150,000, 1.5 lakhs such businesses came online. More than 50,000 of them actually came online using a non-English language. More than 70,000 of them have become exporters creating global brands, and that exports through these brands have exceeded $2 billion. I feel that on a daily basis, there's a lot of innovation happening. And technology and online, in my opinion, is a very strong non-linear lever that is going to drive social and economic change in this country. I mean, we talked about a lot of things, and all of this kind of feeds into this whole notion of an Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar Bharat has to start with an Atmanirbhar Indian, and that implies that we need the ability to unleash the potential of every citizen in this country. And I genuinely believe, in addition to all that we talked about, technology is going to be a big lever, a big kind of a level playing field from that perspective. So I'm very excited to see the innovation that I'm privy to through what I see on Amazon, and I'm sure Bhavesh and many others see the same on a daily basis. And it's just the beginning. So I think this young force over the next decade, this promises to be India's century in all the way I can think of.
Thank you, everyone, for that engaging conversation. But sadly, I have to end here because we've completely run out of time. Thank you once again for taking time out and sharing your thoughts and perspectives on this changing paradigm.
A big thank you to our panelists and of course to Arijit. A big thank you also to all of you tweeting. Remember, the hashtag is #ET Awards. May I now invite N. Venkatram, CEO, Deloitte India, to share his thoughts with us.
Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman ji, distinguished guests, and the larger virtual audience, a very good evening to you. Thank you to the Economic Times for continuing with the tradition of honoring excellence in India, which is built around value, vision, and volumes, so to speak. Today, we celebrate exceptional winners in an extraordinary year. Among our winners are industrialists and visionaries who have achieved success and at the same time have helped address many of the nation's pressing issues, be it housing, healthcare, mobility, or technology services. What we need as we recover and thrive is many, many more companies that help to build a future-ready India. I make this call because of what I see on the horizon in business and policy. First, over this past year, each of us has thought through very carefully about what success truly means. We have stepped beyond our conventional metrics to understand health equity, sustainability, and the quality of life. And we have drawn life-defining conclusions. And how well we will act upon them will shape the future of our children and our grandchildren. Second, we have shown that we can build businesses of international stature and scale. Whether delivering groceries or manufacturing electric vehicles, these enterprises of scale are critical because they create an associated ecosystem of smaller businesses and jobs. This year's proposal in the budget on privatization represents an unprecedented opportunity for business to step forward and translate opportunity into investment. The private investment opportunities in the US $1.3 trillion national infrastructure pipeline is a case in point. Successful implementation can enhance our cost effectiveness and competitiveness as an economy, which is a win for India. Third, the India of today has shown that it is so much more relevant to the world. Our IT companies and global capability centers run by skilled Indians ensure that global multinational operations run not only seamlessly, but also step up on digital, cyber, and analytics to drive value. In a grim year, this truly illustrates the value of a dependable business partner with global enterprise. With about US $57 billion in foreign direct investment, India remains an attractive destination for global capital in what is still an uncertain world. Our dynamic policy reforms herald opportunities in food processing and space, electronics and defense for both domestic and global businesses. And because risk deserves reward, we must incentivize and support innovation, whether in artificial intelligence, affordable technologies for healthcare, or in creating an India that is the food bowl to the world. Finally, Just as England was characterized as a nation of shopkeepers, I would offer that India is a nation of savers. We now need channels and incentives to move our savings into investment. These are the reasons why business, government, academia, and others should be encouraged to work more closely on specific issues to bring such opportunities to fruition. And we must do this with unprecedented urgency and focus so as to make our India a winner and an achiever of the very excellence it celebrates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Venkatram. We now present the next set of awards. And what's the one place none of us ever want to visit, but all of us hope will be a first-class facility? No, not the income tax office. It's the hospital. A few hospitals in India are run better than those under Apollo. And that two redoubtable ladies run this fantastical healthcare business makes it even more special. ET's Businesswoman of the Year are Apollo Hospitals' Preetha Reddy and Sunita Reddy. Congratulations.
I just want to thank the jury, the leadership of the Times of India group for honoring us with this award. And I would like to humbly accept on behalf of the entire Apollo family. My father, Dr. Reddy, came back from the US and set us off on this journey of caring and healing. And my sisters, the three of them, Sunita, Shobana, and Sangeeta, even though Shobana and Sangeeta are not, haven't really been mentioned in this award, it goes to all of them too. And I'd like to thank you all for the acknowledgement to healthcare as a sector. Because by doing this, we have said that, healthcare is so important to our nation. We have done so much over the past few years, and India is now poised to really heal the rest of the world. And I think this acknowledgement really says that it's a job well done, but a long journey ahead because there's so much more to do. I would also like to acknowledge the trust of our millions of patients who really come to us with so much of hope and trust, and for patients from overseas who've also come into the Apollo system. And it's an acknowledgement of trust, of hope, a journey of healing, and of the combined effort and skill of a few thousands of people, almost 100,000 people who are part of the Apollo system. If not for them, we wouldn't be really doing the kind of work which we do today. So thank you all very much, and thank you to the Times of India group for acknowledging it. And of course, the jury members of the jury who really said that we'd like to acknowledge healthcare this year for doing the kind of work which they do. Thank you, and it's been a wonderful journey.
My gratitude to the Times of India and the jury. The Economic Times Award represents one of India's most respected awards. And this time, you chose to spotlight healthcare. This award is not just for me, it's for my visionary father, my fantastic four sisters. In their success lies my success, and the commitment of 60,000 members of the Apollo family. I would also like to thank the government for their support during the COVID period. They gave us the support we needed to treat people in 16 different states. This award is also a recognition of the fact that when we work towards a common purpose, we always win. And Apollo is always about a business with a purpose. There is still much to be done. A journey of 10,000 miles, needs to start with a single step. And I believe we've come halfway through that journey. Today, healthcare moves beyond just physical infrastructure to digital. It moves beyond sickness to well-being. It also means more about the combination of AI with human intelligence. And that's what we hope to do. We hope to enhance the well-being of many millions of lives around us. So thank you for your support. And we look forward to touching many more lives. Thank you.
Congratulations once again. Now, we love Indians who have gone abroad and done well. And once they have done well, we love them even more. But we especially love global Indians who do good things in India. And of late, who's done more for India than DBS Bank's much admired boss, Piyush Gupta, the man picked to rescue a big Indian bank in trouble. He's the entirely deserved winner of the Global Indian of the Year. Congratulations, sir.
Is a great honor. And I'm conscious of the fact that I owe this privilege to the platform that I am fortunate enough to possess, that is the DBS platform. Over the years, DBS has gained a lot of recognition for the scale and scope of our digital transformation, being variously recognized as the best digital bank in the world and even as the best bank in the world. However, what gives us the greatest satisfaction is the knowledge that we've been able to make a difference and an impact for our customers and the communities in which we exist. The change in the customer experience that we have been able to create in several of our marketplaces and countries is something that we're extremely pleased and proud of. In India in particular, I'm very pleased that we have been able to progress our franchise quite compellingly over the last few years. I've always been a big India bull. I think the prospects for the country are tremendous, and therefore being able to build out a franchise and a position in this market that allows us to prosper with the country is something that we're extremely pleased and delighted about. Let me thank the Economic Times editorial team once again, and thank to the eminent jury, which had a hand in selecting me and offering me this award. Thank you all.
Why is the job market reviving? Because the jab market is going very strong. And our next winner is the king of the jab market. Everyone wants to be his friend, including me. Why? Because no one in India or perhaps in the world has done more to get vaccines to people than the winner of Entrepreneur of the Year award, Serum Institute CEO Adar Poonawala. Congratulations.
A very good evening to the honorable, respected chief guest, dignitaries, business leaders, entrepreneurs, fellow nominees and award winners, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great honor and privilege for me to be recognized for my hard work and entrepreneurship that I never dreamt a year ago that I would have to raise capital, take risk and face huge uncertainty and ramp up just like an entrepreneur. And after being a businessman for 20 years, I didn't think I'd have to face these kind of enormous challenges. But it is indeed overwhelming that we've been able to perform and deliver the vaccine to our nation and to the world. And I would really thank the Economic Times and the jury that deemed me worthy for this honor. I will never forget this. I would also like to thank so many people, including the government of India, so many ministries, bureaucrats that have worked tirelessly together with the private sector, the vaccine industry, to remove hurdles and time taken to achieve this. I just hope that this momentum continues. That's my only plea and request after the pandemic's over. I'd like to thank my father, the employees, the scientists, the Serum Institute staff, my wife, my children who have tolerated my behavior and long working hours and have guided me and supported me. And lastly, I would like to finish with dedicating this award to my late mother who passed away 10 years ago. And, I'm here and we're all here thanks to her blessings and her looking down upon us from heaven. And she indeed would have been very proud today of what Serum Institute and I have been able to achieve here. So I would like to dedicate this in her memory And once again, thank the jury, Economic Times, Bennett and Coleman Group, the Jain family for thinking me worthy of this great honor. Thank you very much. Namaste. Thank you so much.
When Ruchi Sharma writes, say, a 900-word column, 1,000 things can happen. That's the kind of influential voice Morgan Stanley's head of emerging markets and chief global strategist is. The investment maven who wrote the seminal book 10 Rules of Successful Nations will now be interviewed by Swaminathan Iyer, ET's consulting editor and one of India's most admired columnists. Enjoy.
Thank you, Cyrus. Well, we have it here with us, Ruchir Sharma, and the happy occasion is that this is now the 30th anniversary of Ruchir beginning to write for the Economic Times. Believe it or not, he began writing at the age of 17 and he hid his age so that it would not be held against him. But it was remarkable that from the very start, he made such an impact that he became a significant writer for us. I became editor in 1992 and immediately we began to display him more prominently because, I mean, he was writing on things like currencies on which we had nobody at that particular point who was an expert in writing. Ruchir, why don't you tell us how you got into this particular game?
Hi, Swami. I really value our association, which, as you say, goes back nearly 3 decades. After I finished my high school, I was waiting to get into college. And I'd already developed a keen passion for global economics and finance by then. In fact, I would sit and track what was happening in all the stock markets around the world and write notes about what was happening back then. But at that age, I could not find any rich people to relieve their wealth. So the next best option was for me to write about what was happening in the world of global economics. And the good news was that nobody in India was really interested in writing about that. As you know, in journalism those days, it was mainly about writing about politics and maybe some economics, but very few had any interest, even forget about writing, in what was happening in global markets. So that's an opening I saw. And the first sort of crack I had at it was to start writing a column called Forex Watch, because that was the best way of connecting what was happening in India and what was happening globally. Some people were interested at least in knowing what's happening to the dollar-rupee exchange rate and how the other currencies are moving. So that was my entry point into writing about global economics and finance for an Indian audience. And it was just good luck then, because I started writing in April of 1991. And as you know, that from around July of that year began the significant opening up of the Indian economy. In fact, I was fortunate enough to watch Dr. Manmohan Singh's maiden budget speech in Parliament from the Speaker's Gallery as a kid. It was quite a thrilling experience to watch that in July of 1991. And India began to open up, and the interest in what was happening in the rest of the world increased exponentially after that. And so the two things coincided: my interest in what was in global economics and finance, and the Indian economy started to open up and transformed in a huge way, and gave me more and more of an opportunity to write about the rest of the world and connect that to India. And what I find really remarkable is how correlated the Indian stock market has been over the last 3 decades, that the correlation of the Indian stock market and the rest of emerging markets is extremely high. If I were to plot the two graphs, you wouldn't be able to distinguish one or the other. So I think it took a while for people to figure that out, but luckily that was something that I was on to at an early age.
Exactly. So in other words, you were able to foresee globalization and how globalized India had already become without our even knowing it. Well, okay, these are exciting days everywhere, including in India. Part of the reason, of course, being COVID, a completely new factor that none of us had thought about. I mean, many people said, what will cause the next bubble to pop. And absolutely nobody said it will be a disease. And yet that is how it turned to be. And we are in this completely new territory. So now let me ask you, what do you think is going to be the future course of COVID in India internationally? And what do you think will be the impact on the economy? You will notice that the IMF has been sufficiently optimistic to say India is going to have 11.5% GDP growth this year, the fastest in history. It's a huge bounce back. Less optimistic predictions about various other countries, but certainly an extremely optimistic one. And then, of course, the question arises, I mean, is this just saying that having reached rock bottom, I bounced off, or is it going to be a longer term thing? So, interesting question for you. Do you believe that we are going to do something 11.5% GDP growth this year? And will that just be a one-time bounce, or do you think it's going to be sustained?
You know, Swami, we have to be careful with these funny numbers just now because these base effects are playing a huge distortion. In 2020, India's economy contracted very sharply. In fact, the contraction was the sharpest of any major economy in the world. And so now from that, we're getting this incredibly sharp bounce. So, you know, there are a lot of funny numbers around the world. Now, remember that the global economy itself, I think, is going to bounce back and possibly grow by a rate of more than 6% in 2021. The US economy looks set to grow at a pace of more than 8%. So these are some incredible numbers that we have not seen in post-war history because of this huge distortion that's been caused by the pandemic. So I'd be very careful about just reading 1 year's numbers. The more important question I think that you have raised is what is the trend growth rate? What is the kind of growth rate that we can expect to see for the rest of the decade? Because that's really what matters rather than 1 year's numbers. So I think that here, as you know, my favorite line about India has always been that this is a country that consistently disappoints the optimists and the pessimists. And I suspect that narrative is not going to change, which is that, yeah, in 2020, there was a lot of room for pessimism. 2021, I think a fair amount of room for optimism. India's COVID situation, in terms of at least the way, if you look at the death rates, the hospitalization, the infection rates, has broadly been pretty good compared to the rest of the world. This is all relative. I mean, it's still sad to see the number of people who have lost their lives because of this, but it's been pretty good. So it's allowed the Indian economy to open up despite the small rise in infection rates we're seeing of late. So in general, I think as far as the Indian economy is concerned, the trend growth rate, and I've been saying this for a while, for the next few years is what I think is maybe like 5%. When we get some acceleration in economic reforms we're seeing now, it goes over 5%. But this is a pretty decent outcome, I think, because you have to put this in a global context. In the really boom years of the 2000s, so many economies around the world were growing at a rate of more than 7%. And achieving a 5% growth rate was considered quite pedestrian. But in this decade, even before the COVID hit, if you look at the past couple of years, there are hardly any economies in the world which are growing at a rate of above 7%. In a year like 2019, a more normal year, there were just some African nations and maybe just one or two Asian nations like Vietnam that were able to snick a growth rate of 7%. There's nobody growing at those rates anymore. This is a very different world. The demographics have changed. The population growth rates have slowed. We have deglobalization taking place. In this sort of an era, to grow at a rate of 7 to 8% is nearly impossible. So I think that if India is able to grow at a rate of above 5%, it will be among the fastest growing economies in the world, which it should be, given the relatively low base we are starting from. But I think that once these funny numbers are out of the way, we need to think about what is India's trend growth rate, and we need to be realistic about what we can achieve. And I think achieving a growth rate on a trend basis of more than 5 or 6% is going to be extremely difficult because there's practically no economy in the world which is currently growing at that pace.
In India, historically, we used to put this fairly close relationship between how much are you investing And how will that investment translate into growth? It used to be called the incremental capital output ratio. And they said, 4 would be a kind of good ratio. Therefore, if I invest 28% of my GDP, divide by 4, I should get 7% growth. If I have 40% investment, I should get 10% growth. Ishar Ahluwalia once said that in the 1970s, we became very bad because the ratio instead of being 1 to 4 became 1 to 5. But if we are investing 30% of GDP, which is today, and earlier it had reached a peak of 37, if you are investing 30 and you divide that by 5, you still get at least 6. You are in some sense saying, I think that the efficiency of investment is going to go down everywhere. The world is suffering, they say, from a savings glut. More money is available for investment than ever before. And despite this huge amount of additional money available for investment, the productivity of that you're saying is going to be so pathetic that our rate is going to go down a lot. Can you explain why you think there is going to be this huge amount of money available for investment and yet it's not going to translate into growth?
Again, it's a global trend, Swami, because productivity growth around the world has been slowing in recent years because a lot of the innovation that is happening increasingly at a consumer-facing level, which is that there are many more apps, there are many more consumer interactions you can do with so many online platforms, but the business productivity around the world has not been that good. So in fact, there's been a declining trend in global productivity over the last couple of decades, not just in India, but everywhere else. So I think that is something which we have to take into account. And that brings me to my other point, which is like you mentioned about all this money which is available in the world, and yet we are seeing this decline in productivity. That is a great point, because this is something I've been emphasizing now for a while, that the central banks can print all the money they want, we can have all the liquidity in the world that we want, but a lot of it increasingly finds its way into financial assets rather than into the real economy. And I think that so it's a great time to have been a financial investor, because the returns in many parts of the world have been terrific, not necessarily in emerging markets over the last decade, but certainly in places like the US. But the gains for the real economy, despite this incredible amount of money flow that you speak about, have been quite slow, because productivity growth everywhere has been lower, as the new innovations have been more consumer facing, more on the entertainment side, and less on enhancing business productivity. Now, we hope that following this pandemic, one of the upsides could be that maybe productivity improves because everyone is reordering their workforce, thinking much more about how to reorganize their workforce. So it's possible that changes, but this trend of declining productivity is again a global phenomenon. We used to have productivity growth in the 50s and 60s around the world of well over 2%. Now the global productivity growth is barely 1%. And this is a huge change across the world, and something that I think that's also India has to live with.
Some people like Hal Varian, chief economist of Google, other guys beyond McAfee and Bjornson, they say that the problem is we are not measuring output properly anymore. There was a conventional way of measuring it. But right now you have a situation where with a smartphone, I mean, it's as good as a audio, a film, encyclopedia, and we are not pricing it appropriately. And if we priced all this appropriately, in fact, GDP growth, they would say, would be fully 1% higher and productivity correspondingly higher. Would you agree that we are therefore doing a disservice? We are, by using the old measurements, we are not measuring real GDP growth properly. We are not measuring productivity properly. And therefore, by sticking to statistics that are not relevant, we are underestimating the real dynamism of the Indian economy and world economy.
That's entirely possible. And there's some element of truth in that, because corporate profits around the world have certainly been a lot stronger than implied by GDP growth. So there could be some element of truth in that. But, I've heard these arguments forever. I heard these arguments in the 1990s also. And I think that this is a global phenomenon about mismeasurement of data that we keep hearing about all the time. as you know, you have the other side of the argument also, which has been put forth by many people, which is that the innovations we are getting are not that productive anymore. Like historically, we got such innovations as the steam engine, or even things like the air conditioning. Is having 10 apps on your phone as productive as those innovations? Some people say, no, it's not as productive as having, as that. So in terms of the list of innovations, so I think that innovations and productivity and change is being a constant over 200 years. We have all, since the Industrial Revolution, we've seen so much innovation that's happened around the world. So to say that this particular period, the innovation and productivity is not being possibly captured, maybe there's some truth to it, but I think it may be true in every era, because we have seen huge productivity explosions, and we have seen even bigger innovations, arguably, the electricity, the light bulb. Remember, these were huge innovations in that era. So this could be something which is true for every era, not just of this era that we are going through. Yeah, the only reason I have some sympathy for that argument is that corporate profits around the world have been much stronger. So maybe they're capturing, because that's real data in terms of what's happening. But otherwise, I'm not entirely convinced that we should just say that this is being mismeasured, because over the last 200, even 300 years, we have always seen innovation take place every few decades in a very major way. And it is debatable in terms of, I think it was people like Robert Gordon who have argued that the productivity increases we're seeing now, or the innovation we're seeing now, is just not as significant as, let's say, the invention of the light bulb or electricity or the steam engine or even air conditioning.
Yes, and yet, many of the people at this kind of meeting, or people reading the financial newspapers, they will say, look, various people are saying that, abstract things like GDP, productivity, maybe these are not going to increase. But if corporate profits are going to keep increasing and the stock markets are soaring, and from our point of view, actually, the future is actually very good. Far from saying that, from 7-8% we are going to fall to 5%, from the point of view of people interested in business profits and the stock markets, frankly, we are going to have a fantastic future. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that, this entire thing about GDP falling, the good thing about corporate India is that it has adjusted to this new reality. We saw this in the late 1990s also, Swami, which is that the Indian economy, after liberalization in 1991, in the first few years after that, we saw an explosion in GDP growth rate, or a pretty significant step up in GDP growth rate. And then you had the East Asian crisis in 97, 98, and then the growth rates fell again. It took a while for corporate India to adjust to that. The cost basis was still too fat, and it took a while for them to adjust for that until the new cycle began. I think the good news for corporate India today, and we've seen this even over the past year during the pandemic, is that the cost bases have adjusted quite a bit. They've cut costs very significantly. So many organizations and many firms, including those watching us, I think will agree that they've cut and slashed costs quite significantly over the last year, even during the pandemic, and in general, over the last 3 to 4 years. So I think that corporate India today is leaner, it's fitter, and is poised to do better in the coming years, because their operating leverage will be far greater from a reduced cost base. So any top line growth you get will have a multiplicative effect as far as profits are concerned. So yeah, I do feel more optimistic about the corporate profitability as far as India is concerned, or emerging markets in general.
India is a country where can be huge democratic resistance to reforms when you bring it about, even if you say it's in the long run thing. Okay, so we have Mr. Modi in reform mode, much more aggressive, radical reform mode than in the first term. How far are these reforms going to succeed, and will Mr. Modi be able to overcome these various vested interests which are coming in the way?
Well, I sure hope so, Swami, but I think that what you pointed out is very important, and this is a trend I'm seeing across emerging markets, which is that the developed countries have spent all their energy in this crisis on enacting greater and greater stimulus plans. Emerging markets have also done stimulus plans, but only a fraction of what the developed countries have done. And this is because the emerging markets just didn't have the resources to spend as much as the developed countries have spent. By some estimates, I think that the developed countries have spent more than 3 times as far as the total stimulus is concerned, if you include everything from credit guarantees to QE and obviously the fiscal impulse that they have done compared to what emerging markets have done. So it's a huge difference. Now, the good news here is this, that whereas all the stimulus that the developed countries have done can give them a sugar high, the emerging markets have instead been forced to carry out more economic reforms that enhance productivity over the medium and long term. And I think that this is where India also has played a very important role, which is that the narrative has changed of this government, which I think is something worth noting. Because as you pointed out, that before the past year, all the reform efforts were largely very incremental in terms of what was going on. And some of it was even backsliding in terms of increased tariffs and protectionism. So at least there's been a change in the narrative. A lot has been spoken about how the word privatization now is at least openly embraced by the government. So there is reasons to still be skeptical as to how much of this can be implemented. And that's always going to be the case in India, that you're never going to be able to steamroll your way through economic reforms. There's always a lot of resistance along the way, but at least the direction has changed, and that's worth something. Now, the entire hope is that there will be follow through. There'll be no complacency, that if we begin to see what we spoke about at the outset of this dialogue, that if we begin to see 11, 12% GDP growth numbers, we began to feel very triumphalist about it and think that, okay, we have done our bit and off we are to the races. I hope that doesn't happen. But the fact that there's been a shift in the narrative, there is a recognition that reforms have to be carried out, even if half of what is being promised is delivered upon, I think is a pretty significant achievement. So I think in that way, let's at least be optimistic about that there's been a shift in direction.
The role of the RBI has been a big thing. There was earlier on this focus on trying to target inflation. Then the question arose, what is inflation? Is it the wholesale price? Is it the consumer price? And there was change. You have now come forward with this new idea that, what's really been, people are saying there is no inflation, but in fact, there is a huge inflation of asset prices. I mean, anybody who's been a shareholder in Amazon or in Tesla or something has made more money than they could have dreamt of in a lifetime. So have we got our entire concept of inflation wrong? If so, should the RBI take note of this, and should India have a completely new monetary policy?
Yeah, I think this is a question that all central banks around the world are facing. And my point is that policy needs to evolve. So for many decades, the world was on this gold standard. And then that gold standard broke. Then there was a total lack of policy clarity in the 1970s. What should be the case? Inflation emerged as the big Scrooge of that era. So in the 1980s, the natural policy response was to start moving towards inflation targeting. And we had an inflation targeting regime that many central banks around the world adopted in the 80s, 1990s, and the 2000s. And in fact, the Reserve Bank of India was among the last major central banks in the world to adopt an inflation targeting regime when inflation went out of control a decade ago or so. I, at that point in time, was supportive that at least the RBI needs to have some policy focus and some discipline, so it made sense. But I think that policy needs to evolve over time. All central banks around the world have been too focused on a very narrow concept just now of consumer price inflation, with the thought being that in a developed country, if consumer price inflation is around 2%, that's fine. If in an emerging market, if consumer price inflation is around 4%, that's fine. I think that's way too narrow, because by keeping the focus on that, we are missing out on the fact that you have other factors such as technology, automation, globalization, which have kept consumer prices relatively low, but asset prices have been booming around the world. And it's not just stocks and bonds, it's property prices too. now India has not participated in this global property price boom, but from China to Scandinavia, you've seen this incredible boom in property prices. And that's something that a lot of the excess liquidity has been finding its way there. So I think that this is a wake-up call for central banks around the world, that the focus cannot be just that narrow anymore. That, okay, as long as we have consumer price inflation under control, we can afford to keep printing as much money as it takes to get unemployment low or to revive economic growth, without understanding that there are other consequences of your policies, including asset price inflation. And asset price inflation can also have very negative outcomes in two ways. One, when asset price inflation takes place, it leads to much greater income inequality and wealth inequality, because assets, by definition, are owned by the rich, and many of the poor do not own these assets. And the second consequence is that when you end up getting a bust, an asset price inflation that turns into asset price deflation is terrible for the economy, because as we learned in places like Japan or even the US in the 1930s, that you can live with these consequences and take a long time to clean up your balance sheet once your asset prices go bust and you're saddled with a lot of debt which finance these assets. So I think that what the Reserve Bank of India and other central banks in the world need to do is to widen their focus to not just consumer price inflation, but also asset price inflation.
The assets then include not just properties, there's gold, there's silver, now the cryptocurrency.
Yes.
I mean, would that be a case of saying, let's just continue this total ban on cryptocurrencies, because we don't want that kind of inflation, we don't want that kind of diversion of our resources into that? Would you favor a ban, or there are other people who say we actually have to go that way because the future is there?
Yeah, I think that I'm not in favor of these bans, because that's really like playing whack-a-mole. You know that if you have too much liquidity out there, you knock something in one segment, it shows up somewhere else. So why cryptocurrency is doing so well, I think we have to think deeply about this. It's also because of the entire amount of money that the central banks around the world have printed. There's one statistic here which was, which is really eye-popping. 20% of all the dollars in circulation in the world today were printed just last year. Think about this. All the dollars in circulation, 20% were printed just last year. Even in places like India, the Reserve Bank of India was forced to print a lot of money to revive the economy. That nearly 10% of all the rupees in circulation were, I think, printed just in 2020. So not as much as the Fed did, but even there. So you're printing all this amount of money, and to expect no consequence because of this is, I think, just wrong-headed. There will be consequences. On the cryptocurrency front, their supply is very limited. A lot of the young generation, the millennials, etc., think that cryptocurrencies is like a store of value for them. It's the alternative to gold. So therefore, they're rushing there. Of course, there's some speculative element to it when an asset rises exponentially, but you have to think about what is the root cause of this incredible inflation in cryptocurrencies. It's coming from all this money printing which is going on, which is finding its way in different places. Now, if you ban something at one place, it'll show up somewhere else. So therefore, these bans are just like playing whack-a-mole, where you put the lid down somewhere and something else will pop up at another point.
Well, all I can say is that election forecasts are difficult, economic forecasts are difficult, stock market forecasts are very difficult, and yet somebody once told me that the more uncertain things there are, the more there is demand for astrologers, because people desperately want a forecast when things are uncertain. So they are looking out for us. I do not know to what extent we have enlightened our audience here today, but I do hope that we've given them some food for thought on the economic side, the stock market side, and the political side. Thanks very much. You've been with us for 30 years, and some people would say, let's hope you will be with us another 30 years.
Thanks, Swami. I think that we've had a great journey together, right from the time that you were there at the editor at the Economic Times. And I think that it's people like you, who have encouraged young people like me back then. I mean, you're still young, but but it is young people like me back then that made such a big difference, because it would have been so easy to have dismissed what something like a 17 or an 18-year-old was writing. But you did not go and look at what was the resume or the background behind that individual. You just sort of looked at the output and ran with it. And that is something which I really appreciate. And that's why this relationship of ours is so special and goes back 3 decades. Thanks for that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ruchir. Thank you, Swami. Wonderful discussion. Plenty to tweet about, ladies and gentlemen. So do not forget to use the hashtag ET Awards. And now it's time for our final set of awards. In life, if you want a laugh, please come to me. But if you want a home, go to HDFC. What more can I say to appreciate the extraordinary performance of the mortgage business of HDFC? It has shown that customer trust is the key to a healthy bottom line. The home truth in business performance is that HDFC is the company of the year. Congratulations.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is an honor for HDFC to be selected as Company of the Year for 2020. Members of the esteemed jury and the Economic Times, thank you for this recognition. This award is extraordinarily special for us at HDFC, particularly because of its timing. For us at HDFC, this award will always be a remembrance of how grateful we are to have emerged from one of the most scathing times in living memory. We owe this award to the trust and confidence of our customers and stakeholders. In equal measure, we deeply acknowledge the timely measures and support of the government, the Reserve Bank of India, and other regulators whose collective efforts at a systemic level help stabilize and restore confidence in our financial markets. This award gives all of us at HDFC renewed zest and work harder to make India a larger and more affordable property-owning democracy. There can be no greater security for a family than a home. We know that people feel safer and are happier, healthier, and more prosperous when they are homeowners. At HDFC, we will continue to strive towards helping more Indians become homeowners, as this was the very purpose for which we were set up. I would also like to congratulate all the other winners in the different categories for their achievement. Finally, to all the employees of HDFC and their families to whom this award belongs to, thank you for being a part of HDFC and for your excellent contribution, commitment, and passion during these difficult days. And in the words of Robert Frost, do remember that, and I quote, "We have promises to keep and miles to go before we sleep, and miles to go before we sleep," unquote. Thank you.
Congratulations to our winners, and now on to our next award. Central bankers are the exact opposite of me. They talk only when required and then to a few measured words. That makes me all more appreciative of this year's winner in the Business Reformer category, RBI Governor Shakti Kanta Das, who brilliantly led India's first policy battle against 2020's recession. Congratulations, sir.
I would like to thank Economic Times and the members of the jury for selecting me for this award for the Reformer of the Year. It's indeed an honor, a privilege. I would also like to acknowledge the role played by the entire team in the Reserve Bank of India throughout this entire pandemic year, that is throughout this year 2020, in dealing with the COVID-related stress and the situation. The Reserve Bank has tried to be as proactive as possible to deal with the situation and the challenges arising out of the COVID. And I would like to assure all the viewers and everyone who's participating here today that it shall be our endeavor at the Reserve Bank to continue to be proactive and focus completely on supporting growth while maintaining price stability and financial stability. Thank you once again.
Congratulations once again, and now we move on to our next award. In life, there is something about riding a motorbike on wide open roads that you simply don't get from driving a car. And there's something about our next winner when it comes to two-wheelers that his competitors simply don't get. That's why his company is India's and the world's largest two-wheeler maker. And what a ride it has been this past year. Pawan Munjal, Chairman and MD of Hero MotoCorp, is our Business Leader of the Year. Congratulations, sir.
Honorable Finance Minister Shrimati Nirmala Ji Sitaraman, my dear friend Vineet Jain, the esteemed jury of the ET Awards for Corporate Excellence, the entire team at Economic Times, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My namaskar to all of you. I'd like to start by profusely thanking the global jury of the ET Awards for Corporate Excellence and the Economic Times for bestowing upon me this unique honor of Business Leader of the Year 2020. This prestigious award, coming from the leading business paper of our country, is indeed very gratifying and a great honor for me. My father began this journey with bicycles in the 50s, which I then continued forward with motorized two-wheelers in the early 80s. Neither of us could have then imagined that I would one day be holding this coveted award in my hands. I would like to dedicate this award firstly to my father, Dr. Brij Mohan Lal Munjal, our Chairman Emeritus. It is all the more heartwarming for me as I received this award in the year that Hero MotoCorp surpassed the monumental milestone of 100 million units in cumulative production and sales. Our 100 million milestone is not just Hero's achievement, it is a significant landmark in the Make in India initiative. This has been possible because we at Hero have been one of the pioneers of this journey, making in India for the world for decades. My heartfelt thanks to the 100 million heroes around the globe who have reposed their trust and faith in us. Hero MotoCorp is today a leading global brand due to the relentless efforts, dedication and commitment of my team at Hero, my leadership team and thousands of my colleagues and associates spread across 40 countries around the globe. I owe everything and every success to the efforts of my team. I also remain eternally grateful to our dealer partners, supply chain partners, investors, and the large family of shareholders who have believed in our vision and kept their unshakable faith in Hero MotoCorp. Most of all, I also wish to thank the government for their forward-looking policies and vision, which is inspiring us to create a sustainable future for all. I also remain eternally grateful to our investors and the large family of shareholders who have believed in our vision and kept their unshakable faith in Hero MotoCorp. I am immensely grateful to my immediate family for all their support and encouragement throughout this journey. Without them, none of this would have been possible. I can only say, my Hero Parivar, has been the pillar of my strength and a huge source of motivation. I assure you, this recognition provides me with more ammunition to ride at an even faster pace towards realizing our stated vision, be the future of mobility. Thank you.
Congratulations to our winner, and now for our final award. There are some leaders who even the best of the best in the business are in awe of. Not only are they super achievers, but also focused on doing good. And having built one world-class institution, they don't just hang up their boots. Aditya Puri, who made HDFC Bank the first name in banking, stepped away after an extraordinary stint and now advises the Carlyle Group. He is, without question, the perfect winner of the Lifetime Achievement Award. Congratulations, sir.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I humbly accept this award and would like to thank Eco Times, the eminent jury, friends, and well-wishers. But most of all, I'd like to thank my wife and my family for being a pillar of support and tranquility. The world has been going through rapid change, but COVID has turned it on its head, accelerating the changes that were already in motion. We are seeing change in geopolitics and geoeconomics. Democracy linked with global trade has failed to address the problems of financial disparity and poverty, leading to a more stringent political discourse. The rise of China and it giving competition to the only superpower US has also resulted in new political and economic blocs, which will have their influence as they go forward. Climate change has moved from the drawing rooms to center stage. Over the last 10 years, we have seen global warming of 1.5%. If we really don't do somersaults to change, to further reduce the global warming, you can imagine what will happen if, based on current programs, it only goes to 3%. Then you can imagine what will happen, because with just 1.5% global warming, we have seen the frequency and intensity of the typhoons, the floods, the droughts, the forest fires, the rising water levels, and the attendant social problems, which disproportionately affect people at the bottom of the pyramid. So we all need to concentrate on this. A clear realization that the government cannot do everything is leading to a change in corporate and individual behavior. Corporates are moving from shareholder focus to a stakeholder focus. A good start would be a more focused CSR. Individuals will also have to give back more to society. The digital revolution, consequent to the secular shift in telecommunication, computing, social media, artificial intelligence, etc., has resulted in changing the way we work, play, and live. A combination of all these changes will require a transformation in society, the way government functions, the way corporate functions, the way individuals function. India is extremely well positioned to gain from this fundamental change that is being brought about globally. The digital infrastructure for public good, which has been created by the government, which covers UPI, eKYC, Aadhaar, and other elements of the India stack, coupled with the secular shift in industry, telecommunications, etc., allows us, with the fact that we have the largest coverage of bandwidth, broadband bandwidth, and we have the lowest cost and almost the maximum number of users on internet, phone, etc., to actually pole vault in our transformation of society, people, corporations, and thereby leave the competition way behind. The spending on infrastructure, agriculture reforms, and the focus on making credit easily available occurs very well for semi-urban and rural India and for the SME and the individuals. A combination of this should result in a change in the fundamental affluence in semi-urban and rural India, where 60% of the country lives. This would create a middle class equivalent to our current middle class, upwards of 200 million people. Due to the paucity of time, I don't want to cover the other. I'll avoid covering the other initiatives which you're all aware of, which are equally important. That is health, education, social upliftment, etc. But suffice it to say, welcome to the land of opportunity. That's India. I would strongly recommend that all of us focus on making sure that the plans we have put in place, which will ensure that India achieves its rightful place in the order of nations, are actually executed through mutual cooperation and teamwork. I wish you all the best. Take care, stay safe, and let's have a great India. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this year's ET Awards event. Yes, it was virtual, but we still had such a great time. And yes, unlike in-person ET Awards events, I can't now invite you for drinks and dinner. But I will raise a toast to this year's great winners, and I hope you all do so too. A big thank you again to our partners Deloitte, and may I suggest audience members to take a little time to visit the Deloitte Experience Zone in the lobby. There's some fascinating content built around Deloitte's World Climate Initiative. See you all in person next year, and thank you for being with us virtually this year. Thank you very much. Have a great one.